Hey everyone, if you're new here, welcome. My name is Keisha and today I'm going to be talking about all the books that I read in the month of January. So I ended up reading a total of 10 books this month and I'm really excited to talk to you guys about them, so let's just go ahead and jump right into it. The first book that I read this month was Tell Me Everything by Cambria Brockman. I'm really excited to talk to you guys about this book because I don't feel like a lot of people have heard of this book or talked about it. I myself had not heard about it before I got it for Christmas, and it was actually part of a blind date with a book that my in-laws got me, so I was really excited to check this one out. It's a mystery thriller that is said to be kind of based on, or maybe not based on, but similar to A Secret History, which I know we don't need to compare those two because A Secret History is like a classic. So keep that in mind when you're going into this one. But I would like to have more people read this and chat with me about it in the comments since I haven't really heard of anybody talking about it. So this book follows our main character, Malin, and Malin is coming into college and she meets this kind of misfit group of friends that she gets in with. There are a couple of girls, a couple of guys, and I think there's 6 of them. And it starts out in senior day, and on senior day, somebody's murdered. You don't know who it is, and you don't know who did it. But you try to figure that out throughout the book. So you start with the murder, and you're trying to figure out the mystery of it throughout. And what's really cool about this is it jumps in timelines between senior day, freshman year, and Malin's childhood because she had some pretty traumatic experiences happen during that time. This book is kind of a slow burn. It's not a fast-paced thriller. I probably would not market it myself as a thriller. I would say it's more of like a suspenseful mystery novel, but it was really good. I thought it was above average and I ended up rating it 3.5 stars. The reason that I bumped my rating down is because it was slow and there were elements of this book that I don't personally like in my reading taste. If you've read the book, The Push by Ashley Audrain, some of those elements came into the story and I didn't really like that. There's also some animal cruelty that takes place and there were just some things that it was a little bit harder for me to get through in those terms. So it's not that the book was bad, it's that it's just not quite what my reading taste is, but I did really enjoy it overall. I can't talk bad about the book because I feel like I want more people to read this and I think a lot more people would enjoy it. Like I said, it is slow, but once you get to the end and you start kind of unraveling the mystery and figuring out all these different secrets, it's pretty interesting. I can't really go into detail about it because obviously spoilers, but just kind of finding out Malin's past and how she became the person she is was super interesting to me, and figuring out all of the different secrets of all of the different kids in this book was just wild. So I would recommend checking this one out. If you have read it, go ahead and leave me a comment and let me know what you thought because I would love to chat about it, but I did end up giving this one 3.5 stars. The next book that I read was A History of Wild Places by Shay Earnshaw. This is one of my most anticipated books of the year. I got this one for Christmas also, and I was so excited to get to this one because I love Shay Earnshaw's writing. She is an author that has some of the most beautiful writing and atmospheric reads, so I was really excited to get to this one. I've read all of her books so far, and this was my 3rd by her. This was also her first adult novel, and it follows Travis Wren, who is a man who can find missing people. If he touches different objects that belong to them, he can see bits and pieces of their lives and kind of help find them. So I thought that was a really cool aspect of the story, and Travis is trying to find Maggie St. James. Maggie St. James is a macabre children's author, and she had kind of a random disappearance. So Travis goes to find her, and he thinks she might be in this reclusive village called Pastoral. They kind of live off the grid. Think The Village, if you've seen the movie The Village. This is very, very similar to that, and I think if you love that movie, you would definitely love this book. So Travis goes to find Maggie in Pastoral, but then Travis ends up going missing himself. Then you jump from Travis's perspective to following these members of Pastoral. So you have Calla and Theo, who are a married couple, and then you have Calla's sister Bee, and all these different characters in Pastoral. So you're trying to unravel this mystery of Pastoral, and you find out that Travis has been to Pastoral. Has Maggie been to Pastoral? What happened to them? This is a really cool story. It's not so much a thriller for me. I think it gets thrilling at times, but it's much more of a suspense novel with a little bit of a magical realism aspect possibly thrown in there. So I think that most people would really enjoy this. I've seen a lot of people that have loved it, and I'm so glad that more people are reading Shay Earnshaw's work. This was a 4-star read for me. I just felt like there was a little bit something missing, but overall, I really enjoyed the story and I highly recommend it. The next book that I read is one that I've actually loaned out right now, and that is The Grace Year by Kim Liggett. This was a book that I really didn't want to pick up this month. I just wasn't in the mood for it, but it ended up being exactly what I needed. It was very fast paced. It was a palate cleanser. It is a dystopian novel, and it's compared to The Hunger Games a lot, which I'm not like a huge fan of The Hunger Games. I don't dislike it. I just don't gravitate towards books that kind of connect themselves with that. But I thought The Grace Year was really, really good. It's about our main character, Tierney. And Tierney is part of the society where when girls turn 16 years old, they have to go out for a year to the woods, into the wilderness for their grace year to release their magic into the wild before they can come back and live in society. Now, this book is very much one of those where you see there's a patriarchy. You see that women are very much pressed down in the society and they get blamed for basically men being pigs. And it riles up a lot of emotion in you, especially if you're a woman, I believe. And I really enjoyed it. It made me feel all kinds of things, but there was such a good message here. I didn't really like I've said this a couple of times in previous videos, but there were some sexual undertones with this book. And I'm not sure if that's exactly what I'm meaning to say, but if you've read the book, maybe you can infer what I'm talking about. There were just some things that I don't know, for a young adult novel, I felt like it was very intense, and I did not feel like I was reading a young adult novel. But then again, I don't read a lot of YA, so maybe it's just been a while and I don't realize that all of that stuff is in these books. Regardless, I thought this was a really good story, just seeing how the girls experience their grace year and then also being frustrated because it seems like it should be so easy to realize how to get through the grace year successfully without any deaths or anything else happening, and it's not, and it's very frustrating, but it's also really cool to just see how it plays out. There's a romance that takes place that I wasn't really too keen on at first, but I see how it plays into the story. I thought there was a really great message behind the story, and I loved all of the twists and turns at the end and seeing how different people were connected. I thought that was really good and well done, and yeah, I think Kim Liggett is a great writer. I think this is a great book, and I think a lot of people would enjoy it. I did rate it 4 stars, and that was just because of reading taste. I think it would have been 5 stars objectively, but personally, it's not my favorite content, but I definitely couldn't put this one down, and I have to say all the good things about it. It was a 4-star read for me, and I would recommend it. The next book that I read was an advanced reader copy. This one is Ripped Away by Shirley Riva Vernick, and the author so kindly sent me this book in exchange for an honest review. This book goes on sale February 8th, so it'll be coming out pretty soon for you guys that want to get your hands on it. It is a middle grade, kind of like an upper middle grade mystery historical, and it takes place during the Jack the Ripper spree in Victorian London. So you have our main characters, Abe Perlman and Mitzi, and Abe goes to this fortune teller, and while he's trying to get his fortune, he ends up being thrown back in time into the Jack the Ripper spree, and he's like in another person's body and living his life as another person. And it turns out his crush, Mitzi, is actually there too, and so they have to figure out what their purpose is to be thrown back in time and have their fortunes like come true as to what they need to do before they can go back to real time. I thought this was really interesting in the aspect of learning more about the Jack the Ripper sprees and how that affected the Jewish community. I know a lot about like the Holocaust and stuff like that, and I know that Jews have always been kind of mistreated in the past, but I didn't realize how mistreated they were during the Jack the Ripper sprees. I don't want to go into too much detail, but I would highly recommend, if you're interested in that subject, reading this book or looking it up. Now, I will say that while this was an easy book to get through, I just felt like it was a little bit too short and there was a little something missing. I also didn't really connect with the characters or the story that much. I felt like if we would have had more time with them, then I might have enjoyed it more, but overall, I just felt like it was a little bit lackluster. So I did only rate this book about 2.5 stars, but I do think if this is a subject that piques your interest and if you like shorter stories, so definitely check this one out. The next book that I read is Where the Drowned Girls Go by Shauna McGuire, and this is the next book in the Wayward Children series. I believe this is book 6 or 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's book 7. So I don't know how many books are going to be in this series, but I absolutely love these novellas. They are really quick reads, and Shauna McGuire has such an incredible writing style. It just really grips you and pulls you into the story. For something being so short, I really get invested in these characters and the plots. Her writing is very beautiful and unique, and I don't feel like I've ever read anything else like it, but it really just draws me in. If you don't know, this is part of Shauna McGuire's Wayward Children series, where these kids end up falling into different doors or going through different doors in their life. Think how Alice fell into Wonderland or how the Pevensies went into Narnia. And these kids are going through these doorways into these worlds where they feel like they really belong. They are a little bit darker of worlds. These are more dark fairy tales than light, but I love that aspect of it. And for whatever reason, the kids end up being thrown out of their doors, or they leave their doors, and now all they want more than anything in the world is to be back in the place where they feel like they belong. But of course, when they come back, their parents think that they are having some kind of psychotic break from a traumatic experience, whether they were kidnapped or whether they were lost. So they send them to Miss West's Home for Wayward Children, or Eleanor West's Home for Wayward Children, where they think it's kind of like a mental health facility, a rehab facility, but really Eleanor West has been through a door herself, and she is trying to help these kids either adjust back into the real world or find their doors again. This story picks up and follows a new school called Whitehorn Institute, which I thought was super interesting because Whitehorn takes a completely different kind of approach to these kids than Miss West School does. It's a lot darker, and yeah, I just think it's really interesting. This was definitely one of my more liked stories in the series. It's still not a favorite, but I still thought it was really well done. I ended up rating it 4 stars, and if you have not checked out this series, I would highly recommend it. The next book that I read was a buddy read with my friends Lauren and Liv, and we read Finlay Donovan Knocks Him Dead by El Cazimano. This is the second book in the Finlay Donovan series, and this one actually comes out on February 1st, so make sure you get your hands on it. And if you haven't read the first Finlay Donovan book, what are you doing? I think that most people would really enjoy this series. It is kind of a quirky mystery. It's not necessarily cozy because it doesn't really have all of the cozy vibes. It's just more of a humorous mystery. There's still some darker elements in there, but I definitely think that the humor carries the series. If you don't already know, this series follows Finlay Donovan, who is a writer. She meets with her agent in a Panera Bread to pitch her next story, and a woman overhears them talking and mistakes Finlay for a contract killer, and chaos ensues from there. Then you have Finlay and her babysitter and friend Vero, and I love their relationship. It's very much a Thelma and Louise type story, so if that seems to be kind of your vibe, pick this up because it is so funny. And the comedy, like Vero has the best one-liners in comedy. She is one of my favorite book characters of all time. She really carries the story. I think it's really interesting just to see what happens and all of the hijinks that these two get into. It's very much one of those things that you kind of have to suspend your disbelief for the story because it's not very believable, some of the things these girls get into. And I mean, I don't know. Do I think this would happen in real life? Probably not. But it's still very fun to follow, so I definitely think you should pick this up if you haven't already. The second book was just as good as the first one. I rated both of them 4 stars, and I would highly recommend because I feel like most people would really enjoy this. The next book that I read was actually an audiobook, and it's The Patient by Jasper DeWitt. I have been itching to read this one. I have not heard really anybody talk about it, and it doesn't have like super high ratings on Goodreads, but it's one that I was really interested in because it was pitched as The Silent Patient by way of Stephen King. You guys know that The Silent Patient is one of my favorite thrillers, so I was really excited to check this one out. So this is a psychological thriller. It follows this man who is a young doctor. He's in his 20s, and he starts working at this psychiatric ward where he finds out there's a patient there that nobody really messes with. There are orderlies and maids that have to go and attend to him, but mostly people avoid him, and it's because people have psychotic breaks, they end up committing suicide, or they get entered into the ward themselves after they have so much time with this patient. The patient's name is John, and he has been admitted at this psychiatric ward since he was 6 years old, and he's now in his 40s, and nobody really knows what his diagnosis is. They have mentioned different things, but they can't really figure out what exactly it is that he has, and it's because his symptoms change all of the time. So this new doctor comes in, and he is determined to figure out what is going on with John, and that's all I'm going to say. This is a very short book. It's less than 300 pages. The audiobook was incredible. If you have 4 hours of your life to spare, or if you listen on 2 times speed, just 2 hours of your life to spare, I would highly recommend checking this one out. I don't think everybody would enjoy it, but man, like, this was my only 5-star read this month, you guys. It was so good. I really enjoyed reading it and just learning, I don't know, like trying to figure out what was wrong with John and seeing from point A to point B all of the different like hypotheses as to what was happening. It was just so good. And the ending was like, I feel like some people wouldn't like the ending, but I really loved it. And like the last couple of lines, I'm like, this is hilarious. So please check this one out if you have not already. There is some body horror in this one. There's mentions of suicide. There is a couple of short mentions of animal cruelty, but they're literally like a couple sentences. So if that bothers you, I hope that it doesn't deter you from reading this book, but I do want to mention that just in case it does trigger you. Either way, I think this was a great book. It was my favorite book that I read this month, so I want everybody to read it, and I'm sorry if you don't like it, but I really hope that you do. It was 5 stars and my favorite book this month. Another book that I read was Winter Magic by Abby Elphinstone. This is actually a middle grade short story collection made up of fantasy, magical winter stories, and Abby Elphinstone curated this. There are a bunch of very notable middle grade authors from the UK on the back. This is a beautiful edition of this book, so I was very excited to get my hands on it. This was actually my Booklight's middle grade book club pick for the month. So this was our first short story collection, and it was really fun to kind of get to dive into these stories with my kids and see how they enjoyed short stories. I do think that they much prefer reading one story in a book after our meeting, but I do think they overall ended up enjoying this. They loved some stories, they didn't like other stories, but overall the consensus was that they rated this about 4 stars. My personal rating was 3 stars, and that's just because I feel like short story collections are kind of hard for me to get into. I did have a few 4 stars in this book, but nothing was 5 stars for me, and I think it's just because you can't really connect with characters and a plot in stories this short, and then some of the writing I liked and some I didn't, so it just depends. But I think if you like short story collections and middle grade fantasies, then definitely pick this one up. Some of them were more like historical or magical realism, but I think this is a good short story collection overall, and I would recommend it for anybody who enjoys this type of story. Another book that I read was Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia, and I thought this book was wild. It is kind of a slower build Gothic story that follows our main character Noemi, and Noemi gets this letter from her cousin Catalina, and Catalina has been married and she lives at High Place Manor, and this all takes place in 1950s Mexico. I have to mention that just so you know the time period. But she gets married and things are going wrong. Like in this letter, she's talking about ghosts and things in the walls and like all this creepy stuff. And so Noemi ends up going to check to make sure her sister is okay, or not her sister, her cousin is okay. She ends up finding this really weird home with these really weird people. Like the family that lives there is just very dark. They're quiet. They're different. They're kind of stuck in time. They seem to be a little bit behind in times. But yeah, it's just really interesting trying to figure out what is wrong with Catalina, and if it's Catalina being sick, or if Noemi's starting to have some kind of like mental break, or if it's something in the house, or if it's the family. Like, what is it? You don't know. This was such a bizarre book. Like I said, it is slow paced. It starts out really slow, and then the ending kind of picks up and ends a little bit more quickly. There is some body horror in this book, but it's not like bloody body horror. It's more of, it's not super bloody. I can't really explain it without spoiling it, but it's not super bloody, so just know that going in. And I know that's a trigger for some people. I know that's why some people don't like this book as much, but I would recommend checking it out. It's just very Gothic. It reads a lot like a modern classic, and I did really enjoy it overall. I don't think that the twists and turns were like exactly what I wanted them to be. I did kind of expect what was going on from the get-go and kind of pieced it together. While I didn't know exactly what was happening, I was pretty close, but I still enjoyed the ride, and there was a relationship that came out of this story. I'm not going to mention what type of relationship, but there was a relationship that came out of the story that I really enjoyed too, so I ended up giving this one 4 stars. And the last book that I read this month was Brazen by Sean Feucht, and this was such an interesting read. I have not read a lot of Christian nonfiction in a while. I used to only read Christian nonfiction, and so I decided to pick this one up because my husband got this one for me for Christmas, and I have been following Sean for a long time, but over the past couple of years more closely. I knew that he was connected with Bethel Church, and I followed them, and so I got interested in him because he was doing like worship with them and missions. And then a couple of years ago, he decided to run for Congress in California. And if you guys know me, you know that I am not really into politics. I don't really follow them. I would not consider myself to be well versed in politics, but it really intrigued me to see somebody who I knew to be a man of faith and just very bold in his faith, stepping out to do something like this. And so I started following him a little bit closer, and he actually ended up leading a not a statewide, but a nationwide worship service called Let Us Worship, where he went to different cities across the nation during COVID, and he would have worship services outside despite the fact that churches were closed and, you know, people were told to stay inside. And I know like that's a controversial thing, but I will say that I really admire what Sean has done, and I really enjoyed this book. because it was kind of telling the story of where he began to where he is now, and how God kind of took him on this detour where he has always had a heart for worship and a heart for missions, and then he felt like God took him on a detour to run for Congress. And so I think that was really interesting, and this is definitely a mission story. So if you're really into missions and just like radical mission trips, check this one out, because he has some pretty crazy stories, and I really enjoyed getting to know him a little bit better through this book. I'm not going to rate this one just because this is his story and I don't want to rate it, but if I was rating it off my enjoyment level of it, I'd probably rate it a 4-star, but I don't want to rate it like overall, just because, like I said, this is somebody's story and I don't feel like it's fair to rate their life. If I was rating the writing, I guess it would probably be a 3 and the enjoyment would be a 4, but that's just to give you guys a little bit of insight. But I did really enjoy getting to know him a little bit more through this story. All right, y'all, I have all but lost my lighting for the day, so hopefully this quality is not too bad, but I hope you enjoyed hearing about the 10 books that I read this month, and maybe I talked about one that piqued your interest. If you've read any of these, let me know in the comments what you thought, or if I piqued your interest in one and now you've added one to your TBR, let me know that as well. And also tell me what one book is like your favorite book or the best book that you read in the month of January. Thank you guys as always so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye, friends.